Well, first of all, very positively. I mean, I think it's caused me to be very critical about the different things, the different shortcomings I'm seeing in my instruction, and the cycle, the 2-week cycles have been really helpful for me in order to give a sense of urgency to improvement. And so, trying to come up with different ways to improve instruction and to measure it so that, so I can see, what's working and what's not working. So I think for me, I mentioned the urgency to change and the urgency to reflect and the reflection with data, I think, is probably been the most useful aspect of that for me. It gives me some structure in order to evaluate and assess. It gives me some peer feedback in terms of what's going well with my peers, and maybe to validate some of the things that are going on that I'm observing. I think quality improvement's been really, really great in terms of that sense of urgency, in terms of that framework, and then just all the supports that come along with it. Mm-hmm. I think that the biggest thing from a QI standpoint is to find ways to incorporate student feedback and give the students ownership in the QI process. And so, just from my understanding when we started, I think it was really adult-driven. It was driven by me and my peers. And I think having that student impact or student feedback from the beginning and student input from the beginning would be really helpful in terms of buy-in, and then for them to understand, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, and I think we probably, what I'm anticipating is we'll see bigger results, just because they understand what's going on and they have an active voice in what's going on in the classroom. And I think nearly everybody. I think you, as a teacher, you kind of like the autonomous aspect of teaching. And so when anytime somebody comes in and asks you to do something different, there's a certain level of resistance to it. And I think that what I learned from QI, just feeling that resistance to begin with, is that really you can take it in any direction that you want to. So it's really it's a framework, and it's a support system that allows you to to keep that autonomy, but it really gives you some supports to improve your instruction and improve the overall education of students. And so I think from that standpoint, I think overcoming that initial resistance and really understanding that there's a lot of autonomy that you have within the frameworks.
I think that it's made me focus and narrow in more on exactly what behaviors and outcomes are going to result in success for my students. Yeah, I think the way they talk about their goals has changed. I remember telling you before about how students are actually using the language of plus delta in other settings to describe like positives and negatives or things that they want to improve and change. So that's just kind of a silly example, but I think because they're able to clearly see their progress from point A to point B, and it's given them language to be able to describe what strategies have gotten them to where they're going. I think it's made them more self-aware too, because they're able to say, oh, this strategy worked for me. I like this strategy in this situation. So I think it's not just giving them the vocabulary, but also like helping them to be more self-reflective about what tools and strategies work for them. I think they're like clearly seeing the connection between, I know this is what I have to do, I know this is where I'm going, and they're excited about it because they came up with what they're working toward. Yes. I think when we started the process, it was very much something that was in my own head, and it was something that was on a board in my classroom. And I think now it's become more of a conversation between me and the students, and I think that it's made the strategies more visible in the classroom. I think the more clear and focused you are from the beginning with something that's like really small and trackable over a period of a couple of weeks, instead of seeing this like, I think I was seeing it as like a quarter-long goal, and I think I needed to back that out a little bit, and at least for the first cycle, make it be more bite-sized.
Quality improvement's been great, really, to give structure to the things that we as teachers already do, but it lets us kind of go back and think about not just our students' learning, but why they're learning and what strategies are most impactful in driving that student learning. And then it's also really been helpful to get students involved in that process, so to get their feedback and to give them ownership in their own learning to help drive those outcomes. Students are definitely more engaged in the learning process, so rather than just being consumers of mathematics, they're actively involved in it. And so they know where we've been, they know where what's worked and where we've been, what strategies have been helpful, and they can communicate that, and then that allows them to apply that knowledge to help achieve future objectives. And by having more voice and say in that process, they become, much more empowered in the classroom, which was really cool to see. With the QI process, every cycle that we do, we'll test, and we have an opportunity to celebrate our successes. And so every week we'll have a test, and I'll show students that both grew and became proficient. And so we celebrate both the proficiency and the growth to kind of destigmatize the math classroom and take the emphasis less from being right or wrong, but to I know this but I don't know this yet. The quality improvement, like me going through this process in front of them, has shown that I'm continually improving in my craft. And I don't know all the answers, and I need help from my classmates and my students, right? And so that kind of emphasis, letting them celebrate when they do something well, but also, hey, we could do this a little bit better, and here's how we might be able to do this better. Yeah, I would say the big thing is just to start. I think it can be intimidating for someone who's just starting out on this, but it's a lot of what we already do as teachers, like the data tracking, the formative assessments, tweaking your lessons based on student needs. And I think QI is all about making that student visible, so putting that in front of the students, having them see it, having them provide voice to it, and also allows you to collect data on it and see what's working. So my advice would be just to start with what you're already doing. Start small, but really buy in onto this process, because I think it's been tremendously helpful in my second year here. But I think if I were to go back, I'd have students involved more critically in what they were doing and what strategies they had at their disposal. Because the power of QI is to increase student agency and empowerment, right? And so if students are thinking about their own behaviors and how they themselves contribute to their own success, I think that's enormously powerful. So making this a little more student-centric from the very beginning, I think I'd do a little bit differently.
Yeah, so it's impacted my instruction in many ways. More directly, I think it's impacted the way I reflect and being able to reflect more thoughtfully on the processes that are going on in my classroom, which in turn affect my instruction. So because of going through the QI process, especially with the plan, do, study, and act, I'm able to evaluate every day what goes on in my classroom and then adjust to make sure that I'm reaching my goals in the classroom. So together we've been able to see, hey, these work, these are a good thing, we're going to keep them in my classroom. And it's just been amazing how their grades have increased just because of a small thing like that. So QI has really helped our entire class be able to do that. It has just improved my ability to communicate with our class, because together, since this is a process that we're all doing, we've been able to grow together and understand what we need, especially individual students' needs. Before, it used to be just a thing for me, so that I know, hey, this is what we're doing, so that today we will, I would give an outline of what we're doing, and just like an agenda. But then throughout the past couple months, I've been able to think and talk with my students about what they need and what helped them be more beneficial. So then I turn this into a class process. So that's where my plan, do, study, act comes from. And then now I invite my students to be a part of this with me. So we talk about what our standards are. And we also think ahead more, which I think has been the biggest part of QI, is that it's helped my students become reflectful of their own learning and take ownership of their own learning. I think that the best piece of advice would be to do it as a team with the people that you work with, and also inviting your students to be a part of it. I think when I first heard about QI, I thought this was just something that I needed to do in my notebook by myself every day, whereas now I understand, no, this is like an everyday thing with my class, and if they're involved in it, then it really just changes the climate of your classroom overall.